morning sun cast long shadows across the dusty ranch land when Samuel Hayes first heard the desperate cry echoing through the quiet valley. "Don't let me die." He paused in his work, mending the fence line, and listened carefully. The voice came again, weaker this time, carried on the warm breeze that swept down from the hills. Samuel was a man of 62 years with hands weathered by decades of honest work, and eyes that had seen both the harsh beauty and cruel realities of frontier life setting. Down his tools he walked slowly toward the sound, his boots crunching softly on the dried grass. He had learned long ago that rushing rarely helped anyone in distress, and often made things worse. The cry came from beyond a small rise where a cluster of cottonwood trees offered shade from the relentless sun. As he crested the hill, Samuel saw her. A young woman lay crumpled in the golden grass, her pale blue dress torn and stained with blood. She couldn't have been more than 25, with auburn hair that caught the sunlight and skin that spoke of a life spent indoors away from the harsh frontier sun. Her breathing came in shallow gasps, and her eyes held the wild look of someone who had faced death and found it wanting. Samuel knelt beside her with the careful movements of a man who understood suffering. He had seen plenty of it over the years: lost cattle in harsh winters, sick children in isolated homesteads, men broken by the unforgiving land. But there was something different about this woman, something that spoke to a deeper part of his weathered soul. "Please," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Don't let me die." He studied her condition with the practiced eye of someone who had doctored both animals and people out of necessity. The blood came from wounds on her arms and side, but they appeared to be from brambles and sharp rocks rather than anything more sinister. Her dress was expensive fabric that had no business in this rough country, and her hands showed no calluses from hard work. "Who are you, child?" he asked gently, lifting her head slightly to help her breathe easier. "My name is Catherine," she managed to say. "Catherine Morrison. I was traveling to Denver with my father, but our carriage overturned in a ravine. The others, they're all gone." Samuel felt the familiar weight of loss settle in his chest. He had buried his own wife Martha 15 years earlier and knew the hollow ache that came with being suddenly alone in an unforgiving world. Catherine's eyes held that same bewildered pain, the look of someone whose comfortable world had shattered without warning. "Can you move your arms and legs?" he asked. She tried and winced but managed small movements. Nothing appeared to be broken, though she was clearly exhausted, and likely in shock. Samuel made his decision with the quiet certainty that had guided him through 6 decades of life. "I'm going to take you to my ranch house," he said. "It's not far, but I need to get you out of this sun and tend to those cuts properly." Lifted her as gently as he could, surprised by how light she felt in his arms. She was like a bird with hollow bones, fragile and delicate, in a way that made him think of his daughter Sarah, who had married and moved east 20 years ago. Catherine's head rested against his shoulder, and he could feel her trembling. The walk back to the ranch house took longer than usual. Samuel moved carefully, avoiding the rougher ground and stopping twice to let Catherine rest. She drifted in and out of consciousness, murmuring words he couldn't quite catch, sometimes calling for her father, sometimes just whimpering softly. The Hayes Ranch was modest but well-maintained. A simple wooden house with a wide front porch and a kitchen garden that Martha had started, and Samuel still tended out of habit. The barn and corral showed the careful attention of a man who took pride in his work, even when no one was watching. Samuel carried Catherine into the house and laid her gently on the bed in what had once been Sarah's room. The quilt was one Martha had made years ago, a pattern of blue and yellow squares that brought warmth to the simple space. He lit the oil lamp and gathered supplies, water and clean cloths from Martha's old medicine box that he had never been able to put away. Cleaning Catherine's wounds, Samuel discovered they were indeed from her fall into the ravine. She had cuts and scratches, but nothing that wouldn't heal with proper care. As he worked, she began to talk in the rambling way of someone still shocked by sudden loss. "My father was taking me to Denver to meet a man he had chosen for me to marry," she said, staring at the ceiling. "A banker's son with good prospects. I didn't want to go, but father said it was time I stopped being foolish about love and romance. Samuel continued his gentle ministrations, remembering his own young manhood, when the world had seemed full of endless possibilities. Martha had been the banker's daughter in the small town where he had worked as a blacksmith's apprentice. Their courtship had been proper and brief, but their love had grown deep and lasting over 30 years of marriage. "What about you?" Catherine asked suddenly. "Do you have family?" Samuel paused in his work. "Martha died 15 years ago," he said simply. "We had a daughter, but she married and moved to Philadelphia. I get letters twice a year telling me about grandchildren I've never met." The admission surprised him. He rarely spoke about his family to anyone, let alone a stranger, but something about Catherine's presence in this room where his daughter had once slept brought back memories he usually kept carefully buried. "Why did she leave?" Catherine asked. Samuel considered the question as he bandaged a particularly deep scratch on her arm. Sarah had been restless in the way that young people often are on the frontier. She had dreams of city life, of theaters and fine dresses and social gatherings. She met a traveling salesman who promised her all those things. And Samuel had let her go because he loved her enough to want her happiness even when it took her far from home. She wanted more than this place could give her. He said finally. I couldn't blame her for that. Over the following days, as Catherine recovered her strength, Samuel found himself enjoying the company in a way he hadn't expected. The house felt different with someone else in it, warmer somehow and filled with a sense of purpose he had forgotten he missed. Catherine proved to be a surprising companion. Despite her sheltered upbringing, she showed genuine interest in the workings of the ranch. She asked thoughtful questions about the cattle and the land, and listened carefully when Samuel explained the rhythms of ranch life. She even insisted on helping with simple tasks despite his protests. You've done enough for me already, she said as she carefully gathered eggs from the henhouse. I need to feel useful. Samuel watched her work and saw something he recognized. The same restless energy that had driven Sarah away, but tempered now by loss and the hard lesson that comfort could disappear without warning. Catherine had been forced to grow up quickly in the span of a few terrible hours. In the evenings, they would sit on the front porch and talk. Catherine told him about her life in St. Louis, the social expectations that had felt suffocating, the books she loved to read, and the dreams she had harbored of seeing the world. Samuel found himself sharing stories he hadn't told in years, about building the ranch with Martha, about the harsh winters they had survived together, about the simple satisfactions of a life lived close to the land. One evening, as they watched the sun set behind the distant mountains, Catherine asked the question Samuel had been expecting. What will become of me now, Samuel? I have no money, no family left, and no skills that would help me survive on my own. Samuel had been thinking about this very problem. He could send her to Denver where she might find work, or perhaps contact distant relatives, but the idea troubled him. He had grown accustomed to her presence, to the sound of someone else moving through the house, and the gentle conversation that filled the long evenings. There is another possibility, he said carefully. You could stay here. Catherine looked at him with surprise. Stay here? She asked. As what? As my wife? If you'll have me. Samuel said the words coming out in a rush before he could lose his courage. I know it's not what you might have chosen under different circumstances. I'm an old man and you're young and beautiful. But I could offer you a home and security, and I promise to treat you with kindness and respect. The silence stretched between them, filled only by the evening sounds of cattle lowing in the distance and the gentle creak of the porch swing. Catherine stared out at the horizon, her hands folded carefully in her lap. Samuel felt his cheeks burn with embarrassment at his presumption. He was about to apologize and withdraw the offer when Catherine spoke. I've been thinking about what my life was before, she said slowly. I was being sent to marry a man I had never met for reasons that had nothing to do with love or happiness. I was like a piece of property being traded between men who thought they knew what was best for me. She turned to look at him then, and Samuel saw something new in her eyes, a quiet strength that hadn't been there when he first found her. But you, Samuel, you saved my life and asked for nothing in return. You've shown me kindness without conditions. You've made me feel valued not as a possession but as a person. I think that might be love, even if it's not the romantic kind I once dreamed about. Samuel felt his heart swell, with an emotion he hadn't experienced in many years. It wasn't the passionate love he had shared with Martha in their youth, but it was something equally precious. A companionship based on mutual respect and genuine caring. "I would be honored to be your wife," she said simply. "But I have conditions." "Name them," Samuel said. "I want to be a true partner in this ranch, not just a housekeeper. I want to learn everything about running this place.